everybody, welcome to the final reveal for Into the Emerald Dream. Today we're going to deal with Death Knight and Priest, and I'm actually going to change the order around from the chronological order of them being released. I'm actually going to start with Priest first, which was actually the last class that was revealed, because I've got an axe to grind, and it needs to start with Priest for me to grind that axe even. So yeah, we've seen some Priest cards already. We've seen Aviana Elun's Chosen, which was some cards suggesting there was going to be a big package since it reduces all the cards for the rest of your game to 1, but it requires some time to set up, and Silent Drake, which was a dragon that created dragons, and sort of implied a dragon package. Now, through all of this, I've been saying, at least for a bit of time, you have to take some of these reveals with a bit of pinch of salt, because there was promised big nerfs that were coming, and we didn't know what they were. Finally, they have revealed what the big nerfs are going to be. It's actually going to hit 20 cards in Standard. I'm not going to deal with Wild. We're just going to deal with some of the Standard cards, so we can see them right now. And I don't think there was any big surprise on here for some of the nerfs. It's typically cards that are in some of the better decks right now. And I will say, having seen all the cards so far, and, you know, the ones ahead, I think if they didn't do this, there was almost a 0% chance any of these cards would have seen play in a tier 1 deck. I think there was such a big disparity between the quality of the cards from last year's expansions versus this one that's coming up. And actually, I'd even go further that the year before that as well was even more powerful. I think there's been a very conscious decision to try and pull the power level down of Hearthstone, and actually I'm kind of okay with that. I think the game had got into a bit of a volatile state, so I'm actually very pro what they're doing. But now we have seen some of the effects. I'm not going to go through all of them, but in particular there are some like notable ones. Infestor, which is in the Zerg Death Knight deck, doesn't give +1/+1 anymore, only gives +1 attack, also has an attack stat added to it. Hydration Station, which is the big win condition for the Taunt, Warrior, and Druid decks, has got a 2 mana cost slapped onto it. Holy Glow Sticks isn't really that big, but if you're a Lunessa Paladin deck, you've lost basically your win condition, so that deck is now crying. Zarimi is a pretty big one, because we are going to deal with Priest today. It used to be its effect triggered off summoning dragons. It's now playing them, so you actively have to play them from your hand to get the Zarimi effect, which is a pretty big deal. It's definitely going to slow Zarimi down. Raza we'll get back to, because it's the kind I've got an axe to grind with. Kerrigan and Jim Raynor also got a mana tax added to them. Artemis is laughing. The Zergling, this is a really big one. It doesn't summon copy anymore, it just summons a 1/1 Zergling, which is a huge nerf to that card. If you hand buff the Zergling, you don't get like the double value from doing that, so it kind of like seriously kills that card. Then a bunch of the Starship cards from the Terran package have all been toned down a little bit, because Starship Shaman was unbelievably strong even after the most recent nerfs that were targeted at Starship Shaman. Expanse has gone to 10/10, but it's still got a really strong effect. Insidious upper mana probably doesn't matter too much if you combine that with Murmur. Bob, his stealing effect is now gone. Instead, he recruits a minion. He copies the minion instead. I assume he still gives 3 coins to the opposition. He doesn't say that on the effect here. If that is true, that is super poo. Like, as an effect, really, really bad. I do appreciate where they've done it, though. If you summoned a big guy, Bob would just steal it. Actually, it's a quite big deal for Amalgam decks as well, because Amalgam decks sort of got caught in the crossfire of these ginormous build a massive guy decks, and Bob just stealing them. People will just steal your Amalgam, so Amalgam deck stocks rising. Unkiliax, he loses Reborn. He is now Kiliax instead. That's a huge deal. He does get a +1/+1 stat if you take that module, but it is way less scary now to get Ziliax out of Hydration Station. For some bizarre reason, Gorgon Zormu's got a mana cost added to it in a 1/1 stat line. Sure. And an Arcanite Defense Crystal, which has been by far and away the best Starship piece ever released. Even in decks that aren't Starship focused, purely for getting a ton of armor over the course of a game, has had its armor slashed by a third. The one change that I've got a big deal with is Raza. And this has got me a little bit irate. Well, irate maybe is a bit of a strong word. It peeved me off a little bit. I actually think it looks really bad on the Hearthstone design team, to be honest with you. So, what is my issue with Raza? Well, Raza's new effect... Actually, let's just move forwards a slide. No. Raza's new effect. The card has been remade because of its interaction with the Priest Imbue package, which hasn't been revealed at this time. True. It now shuffles copies of 5 random friendly minions that died this game into your deck and changes their cost to 0. Previously, it used to say it refreshes the hero power whenever you played a card for the rest of the game. Okay, so why have I got an issue with this? Well, it's actually twofold. One of the things is, Raza the Resealed is based on a classic card, Raza the Chained. Raza the Chained meant that if your deck had no duplicates, your hero power cost 0 this game. Now, you might be saying, how do these cards like really combine with one another or like link to one another? Other than the 5 mana 5/5 stat line, well, they're both linked to hero powers is one of them. So I feel like if you're going to print a card called Raza, and I would class Raza as one of these classic cards, like a Boom or a Velen or a Crush, it has to relate to the hero power in some way. It's just the flavor of the card. But it actually links to it in a bit more of a not really subtle, but it links to the other part of what made Raza the Chain so strong. You almost always ran Raza the Chain with their side act, and that was Shadow Reaper Anduin. And Shadow Reaper Anduin changed your button into Void Form, and every time you played a card, Void Form would refresh. Which, with the effect of Raza the Chained, if you had a Highlander deck, meant that every time you played a card, you could do 2 damage for nothing. You could just keep pushing the button and playing multiple cards. And it was a legitimate win condition, right? You'd play some sort of vaguely controlled deck with a bunch of cheap spells in it, get Raza, get Shadow Reaper Anduin, play them both together. Your button is free and refreshes every time you play a card, and you just shoot out all of your cards, and then pull up from that tailspin, because obviously you're like severely bastardizing your deck to do this. Pull up from the tailspin and win from there. The new version of Raza, what has this got to do with like Raza? Like, it has nothing to do with it. It's nothing to do with the button, nothing to do with refreshing anything. They've just butchered the effect of it. Like, it's crazy. It just loses the core identity of the card. Just to, like, again, give us a bit of context, because I actually think this is quite an important design philosophy in Hearthstone that they're just, like, kind of spitting in the face of. It'd be a bit like having a Boom card. Boom is 7 mana, 7/7. He's Mr. Actually, Doctor to me. Doctor, 7 mana, 7/7, right? It'd be a bit like in one patch, you just go like, oh yeah, we've given Dr. Boom 8 attack. You can't do it, it's part of the core identity of the card. He does booming stuff, I guess especially boom bots, and he's a 7 mana, 7/7. Sure, they do like, blur the edges sometimes, but it'd be a bit like doing, I don't know, King Plush is too strong with charge, so we've taken charge off him, and we've given him like, buff a beast in your deck by +1/+1. What's that got to do with King Crush? We take charge of King Crush and give him Rush? No, it's abominable. It's like, it's truly horrible. So I think they've actually gone too far with this effect. I think they've just brutally murdered the effect of the card. And not only that, they've just taken it in a really boring direction. Why did you not solve it hero power related? Why didn't you just not like change your hero power into something that refreshes? Because then if you imbue it, you overwrite it. So it could exist. Also, and we're going to see in a moment what the imbue button is, why did you not just put a Highlander condition on it? Because surely at that point, the imbue stuff would be harder to do if you had to run it in a Highlander deck. It felt like there were better solutions than what they've done. So this is like one of my gripes. It kind of like kills the core identity of the card, and I think there were better things they could have done with it rather than just shuffle 5 cards that have died this game into your deck, they cost 0, which has nothing to do with like the effect of Raza. The second part I've got an issue with, and oh, sorry, one other thing before I get to the other issue. Actually, it is somewhat related to this. I was actually wondering from the start of this, because they announced this a while ago that they were going to change Raza's effect because of the imbue button. It got me wondering what the imbue button actually was going to do for Priest, because Reno the Lone Ranger existed at the same time as Raza, and Reno the Lone Ranger had a button that did 2 damage, which meant if you had a bunch of cheap spells, you could machine gun someone down with Reno. This deck saw no play. It was garbage, because Priest didn't have enough cheap spells to get the effect of Reno off multiple times to be a legitimate win condition like it was with Shadow Reaper Anduin. This got me thinking for some time, and I guess I should have called it, that my assumption was the button was going to generate something that was cheap, so that you could endlessly use Raza to get the button going off multiple times. And boy, was I right, because I can reveal that the imbue button for Priest is Blessing of the Moon. 2 mana, choose a Priest minion or a Priest spell to add to your hand. It costs 1 less, but it's temporary. This gets me to my second gripe of this effect, or of this package. Why did you print this effect on your button when you knew Raza existed? This was completely avoidable. It wasn't like, you know, well, we had to change Raza because the button was too strong, right, with Raza. And in case you want to know why this is too strong, because if you imbue enough times, you're going to get to the point where the card that you generate from Blessing of the Moon is 0 cost, right? Which means that the card from Blessing of the Moon refreshes the button. Now, you'd normally have to pay 2 mana still, so it would have a limiting factor, unless you could mana cheat the button in some way. Hey, you can cheat the mana cost of the button in some way with Papercraft Angel. So all you would need was Papercraft Angel, enough buffs on the Blessing of the Moon, and you would go infinite. You could just play endless priest cards. So they had to change it. But remember, Raza came first. Why did you make the button generate 0 cost cards? Like, it's not like this is a niche interaction either. Like, I could forgive it if it was like, you know, an interaction in Wild where it's like, oh shit, this card we printed 8 years ago, it's never had a synergy card with it. We've accidentally printed something that synergizes too well with it. We need to change the other thing, or we need to, like, Hall of Fame it or something. I could forgive that. You printed Raza less than a year ago! How did you forget about it? It felt like it was going to be one of these cards that was a core identity for Priest for a year to come. No, we're just going to gut the card. We're going to print something that is so unbelievably broken with it, willingly. And I just butcher the card. Like, it just shows a lack of planning to me. And this is kind of why I said it. I don't think it looks good on the development team. Because to me, it sort of suggests, like, they just weren't thinking about things. I don't know. It's like, it's just abhorrent. So I'm really unhappy with the situation. I think it was completely avoidable. But I guess here we are at this point. And again, I don't want to harp too much on about this because I actually like the identity of the set. I like the idea of what they're doing. I think they've slowed the game down. It's a bit more minion focused. There aren't these huge, insane effects. Well, actually, we'll see some in a moment, but there's not as many of these huge, massive game-ending effects. So I quite like what they're doing. Anyway, to get to this button a bit further, Blessing of the Moon is very similar to Galakron's Wit. Galakron's Wit was in the Galakron Priest deck, which was typically a control Priest deck. And that saw a bit of play, but wasn't particularly strong. Blessing of the Moon is debatably stronger in the fact that you can, firstly, choose your card. Now, the way this card works, by the way, is you get offered a Priest minion and a Priest spell, and you pick one of them. So it's not quite Discover because you only get an option of 2 cards, and you're guaranteed that one will be a minion and one will be a spell. Galakron's Wit, it was random. It was always a Priest minion as well, but it was random, so you didn't get to pick the best option. In the case of Blessing of the Moon, you get to pick the better option. Also, you can get a mana discount on that card. However, it's only temporary, so if you generate 2 cards that haven't got great timings with what you're doing, well, you're bang out of luck, right? You've done 2 mana do nothing, so it has got some pretty big weaknesses. It being a temporary card is pretty bad until you get this thing really imbued to, like, you know, a serious amount. Okay, so let's start going through some of this imbue package for Priest. We have Lunar Wing Messenger. For 2 mana 3/1 beast, lifesteal, battlecry, imbue your hero power. And as a reminder, this is the imbue button of the priests. Oh, in case you're wondering as well, when you imbue it multiple times, it's the bold number that goes up, so it gets more and more discount on the card. Lunar Wing Messenger is basically just Vile Fiend, which is obviously not a great card. The stat line has just been adjusted to have 1 more attack, which is potentially nice for lifesteal. However, having 1 health is extremely fragile. You're liable to just getting pinged by a button of some variety, namely the mage button. So it might get easily killed. That being said, as long as something trades into it to kill it, you're getting the lifesteal, which is kind of really what you're in for, as well as the imbue mechanic. So the quality of this card really depends on how good you think the imbue button is. I'll deal with that in a moment. We also have Kaldorei Priestess. 4 mana 4/4 minion. Battlecry, give all enemy minions -2 attack until your next turn. Imbue your hero power. Wow, they printed worse Quicksand Elemental. Okay, I'm being a bit mean here. It's not worse Quicksand Elemental. Quicksand Elemental was a par-statted 2-cost minion, which reduced all enemy minions by -attack, but it was only for this turn. So when it came back to your opponent's turn, they would have the attack back. In the case of Kaldorei, it still reduces their attack for their turn, and only gives them their attack back onto your turn. So it actually is quite good for defensive purposes. It will let you live longer to get later into the game, and as some sort of value priest deck, and this is obviously geared towards some sort of value priest deck, you probably want to get into the later part of the game, especially if you need to imbue the button 5 or 6 times to get, like, serious value from your button. So the closest thing it is comparable to is Curse of Weakness tied to a 4 mana 4/4 minion. Curse of Weakness was one of the Echo cards back in the Witchwood, right? I feel like this was one of the weaker ones. I'm an old man right now. The Witch one I don't fully remember anymore, other than that bloody Spider Hadronox that I remember. But I don't really remember Curse of Weakness seeing too much play. Either way, if you do value reducing all your minions by -2 attack until your next turn, as a 2 mana-ish effect, you're kind of getting a 4 mana 4/4 stat line, which I think in standard is actually about a 3 mana value stat line with a 2 mana spell tacked onto it. So I actually don't think it's crazy bad. It's probably a bit weak, but it serves its purpose for what it's trying to do, which is simply to get you into the later game to use your bigger control cards to deal with the board and let you get a bunch of value. So I actually think this card is fine. My issue is the button. Blessing of the Moon. You are getting not quite random cards, but you're getting cards from Priest. And getting cards from Priest is a problem because, in general, Priest cards for the last, year have been kind of garbage, with some exceptions. Now, I have to wave my hands around a little bit here. Priest has had, 2 seriously good tier 1 decks. Zarimi Priest, which is still really strong, and Overheal Priest, which was very, very strong. But outside of those 2 decks, the very, core distinct mechanics of those 2 decks, the other Priest cards have been kind of fucking weird, to be honest with you. So just, go through this as an example. Let's say, oh, I get one of my Priest cards. What is it? Oh, it's Ascara. Great. Do I run any Draenei in my deck? No. That's very niche and specific, right? Oh, I generate Chalk Artist. That's kind of niche and specific as well and hasn't really ever seen any play. Keller's Crafter. Generate some zero-cost bandages for, Raza's dead now. Oh, okay, it's 3 mana 3/3, that's fine, right? And the Sensory Deprivation that's seen no play and kind of requires you to have a Pain package in your Priest deck, and Scale Replica for dragons in your Priest deck, and Mystified Tocha if you can get the ultra-specific scenario of having 42 health combined between both you and your opponent. Good things happen. And Sona Regular, if you take damage, Pain Priest, yummy. You kind of get the picture here. Priest has got some ultra niche mechanics that kind of require the entire deck to be built around them for it to actually work. So just generating random Priest cards, it's not quite random because you get to pick one of the 2 cards. I feel like more often than not, you're going to get offered 2 bad cards. Now, on the positive side, at least they're temporary, so you can get rid of the cards, right, by just not playing them. However, this is actually truly, and it's not even joking to sound like the Paladin button where I said it's 2 mana do nothing. It is actually 2 mana do nothing. That is awful. It's such a bad deal. It's the only imbue button where you potentially just get no value. Nothing. I throw 2 mana away, so it feels like unlike the other imbue buttons where you could probably weave it into some earlier turns to give you a little bit of value. I think on the Priest one, you almost don't want to touch it until, you've imbued it a few times at the very least, or you just don't have anything better to do in your turn. So it feels like it's a really, really weak button, in my opinion. What's not weak, though, is Tyrande. 7 mana 5/7 minion, legendary. Battlecry. The next 3 spells you cast, you play, you cast twice. Okay, this card is actually bonkers. Truly, truly bonkers, with the right support. Tyrande is basically 3 copies of Solar Eclipse tied into a minion, which is about a 6 mana effect based on Solar Eclipse being 2 times 3. And not only that, you get a 1 mana 5/7 on top of it. And actually, when you bundle cards together, they get even more value, because it's, you don't have to play 3 Solar Eclipses, right? You didn't have to have 3 separate cards. They were all bundled into one, so yeah, this minion is absolutely insane. It's super strong. It just needs the spell support to make it work. And when this card was revealed, I was like, hang on a minute. That's actually a problem for Priest, because their big cards for value, especially spells, because it needs to be a spell, don't really exist right now. Lesser Diamond Spellstone is about to rotate out, so you couldn't even get a big resurrect off Lesser Diamond Spellstone without having to cast lots and lots of spells during the course of the game. That's not an option. Then a lot of the other options for big spells in Priest are control cards, which would take out Tyrande in the process, which isn't ideal. Or there are effects where it doesn't really matter if they go off 2 times, like repackaging. That doesn't really matter, right? And then actually, if you went through this list, and by the way, there are going to be some spells later on that we'll see which tie this all together, but if you went through the other Priest spell cards, you're looking at stuff like Sensory Deprivation, which is obviously not that good. It doesn't see any play. If you get it 2 times, get 2 copies for 6 mana. I mean, it depends what you're targeting, right? Bearing in mind that the Titans aren't a thing anymore, which would by far and away some of the best minions to copy in the game, you could still hit a Starship, though, so maybe that is good enough. Beyond that, though, it was Chrono Boost. Like, you get 4 cards and 2 minions with charge. It's good, but, you know, you want a bit more, right, for this blockbuster effect. You could hit stuff like Acupuncture as well to actually deal damage to your opponent and actually look for some sort of OTK win condition. Also, bear in mind that Void Shard, which is another card that sees absolutely no play, would possibly see play if it was 4 mana deal 8 damage. And by probably, it would 100% see damage, so it actually potentially gives life to something like Void Shard and Acupuncture. You play Acupuncture, you do 8 damage to both you and your opponent, and then you Void Shard your opponent, do 8 damage to them, and you heal the 8 back up again. In total, that's 16 damage for 5 mana, plus the 7 from Tyrande. Also nice about Tyrande, it's not this turn, the next 3 spells you cast this turn, it's over multiple turns, so you can just play Tyrande on 7, then on 8 play a few spells, and then on 9 play your final spell, and get the value that way. So it's a very flexible card and very strong card in the way it could be used. There's then some other fun stuff you could do. You can Taurus into Hunter still. That could give you Furious Fowls, which, if you targeted a minion, would generate 12 damage worth of minions, tied up as 12/12 stat lines while with birds that are immune while attacking. For 6 mana, that's actually not that bad. It's potentially going to kill almost every minion in the game, barring some bonkers starships. Yeah, that's not too bad. And what about this monkey business? Monkey business. What if you duplicate monkey business with, like, you know, a charging zealot on the board? You play your monkey business, you play your Chrono Boost first, I guess, to get the charging zealot on the board. You play monkey business, it goes off 2 times. The first one fills your hand, because you're almost certainly going to have more than 2 cards in your hand at that point. The first monkey business fills your hand. Maybe you feed, like, a banana to your zealot. Yummy, yummy, yummy. Yummy, yummy zealot. Bananas for zealots. Then the other one, your hand is full at this point. All 8 bananas are fed to minions on the board. That's pretty spooky. 4 mana for +8/+8 stats. Maybe even a bit better than that, assuming you have more than 2 cards. Yeah. That's a serious, like, legitimate win condition, I think, for this Artemis Protoss type priest deck, where you just try and kill them with charging zealots. So I can see monkey business maybe seeing a bit of testing. The other obvious one is like Shladrisil, and I don't really mean Shladrisil in the form of get 10 dream cards. That's a bit too overkill, but maybe in situations where you're playing top deck stone, that might come in clutch. You play Tyrande and then into Shladrisil and just fills your hand with dream cards. I can see a world where occasionally that would happen, but it's more so you're hitting like the, you know, the Corrupted Awakening type things, especially, as I said, you can corrupt it, but 5 damage to all characters or all enemies in particular, doubled, that is serious damage at that point. That is like threatening OT levels of damage. And it's not even just the, you know, the Awakening cards. It's also the Nightmare, or the Nightmare equivalent for the Corrupted version. Giving a minion +10/+10 stats. That is seriously, seriously scary, especially with Charge being a priest mechanic right now. Yeah, I think Tyrande is going to see some play. There's also other things you can do with Tyrande, and this is also not dealing with the cards we're going to see in a moment. What about the treasures from Marin? You hit Zarog's Crown with Tyrande? That's a lot of value. That's a serious amount of value. So yeah, I can see you running these big minions in your Tyrande priest deck that generate extremely high value spells. Also things like Grift of the Trusted Vendor get duplicate effect of your amulets. Again, one of those is deal damage to the face, or potentially can be, so yeah, I can see Tyrande being some sort of spell damage OTK type deck. One final thing I'll say about this as well, and we'll see the full picture as we see the other cards. I expect this deck to be quite spell focused, unsurprisingly, in which case you might want to put Bob in your deck, even though he's got his stealing effect nerfed off him. You might want to do the Find a Triple effect, in which case you might be able to triple the Tyrande, or any of the Tyrande cards that generate these big spell effects, you know, like the Marins or the Grifters. I can see that being a other thing. And one final thing I'll just mention about all of this, I've kind of gone under the assumption right now that, you know, you play Tyrande, and then on the next turn you play like another spell, and the turn after that you play another spell. If you get Aviana set up, and I think you will put Aviana in this deck, you could potentially do Tyrande and 3 spells on the same turn, and actually truly have the OTK in your hand approach. Yeah, I think Aviana and Tyrande will probably see play in similar decks. Then we have some more support for big spells. Weaver of the Cycle, 3 mana 3/3 minion, Battlecry. If you're holding a spell that costs 5 or more, deal 3 damage. This is basically the exact same effect as Eulogizer. It's just whether or not you think holding a spell that costs 5 or more is easier than spending 3 corpses. I know you could forge a Eulogizer, but it kind of changes it a little bit beyond what the comparison I want to make. And actually, I would say I think holding a spell that costs 5 or more is easier than spending 3 corpses, especially on turn 3. Even in Death Knight that has a button that generates a corpse, it's still unlikely to happen, right? So yeah, I think Weaver of the Cycle is better than Eulogizer, but that's not really saying a lot. The other card I'm just going to compare this to is Medea's Valet, which actually has seen play in the past in Secret Mage decks. Is it easy to have a secret on the board versus holding a spell that costs 5 or more for Priest? They're probably similarly comparable. So actually, I think Weaver of the Cycle maybe is like, it's around comparable power level to Medea's Valet, which means it probably could see some play. That being said, Medea's Valet was a 2-mana 2/3, aka pass stat line. Weaver is slightly understated for a 3-drop, so maybe at some point if this card's not seeing any play, just put 1 stat on it, and that would probably be good enough for me to give it the thumbs up and like, yeah, this is standard quality card. Alright, let's start looking at some of the big spells now. Ritual of the New Moon, 5-mana Arcane Priest spell. Summon 2 random 3-cost minions. Cast 3 spells to summon 6-cost minions instead. Alright, as soon as I saw this card, I thought of Power of Creation. It's not really the same quality, right? Power of Creation was a mage spell, which was an 8-cost spell, and you discovered a 6-cost minion, and you'd summon 2 copies of it. Very, very powerful effect, potentially. And moreover, because you got to discover the 6-cost minion. Now, in the case of Ritual of the New Moon, it's 3 mana cheaper, but so are the minions that you're going to summon, right? You're only getting 3-cost minions. And you don't get to discover them, they're random. And as I've mentioned before, because battle cries are normally quite strong effects on cards, it means minions are typically understated. Although I will say with this new set, I feel like that's sort of like twisting back again towards the minions having normal stat lines again. So perhaps as time moves on through the next year, this actually might improve in card quality just because the random 3-cost minions will improve. On the face of it though, 5 mana summon 2 random 3-cost minions, is that worth it? No, that wouldn't see play. A 1 mana cheat on 2 random 3-cost minions is just not good enough. Sure, there are some high rolls there, but there are some really low rolls. Now, the other part of it though, the 6-cost minions for 5 and getting 2 copies of them, that is good enough to see play. The other card I just want to compare this to is Command of Neptulon. That was a 5 mana spell. It has Overload, so you could treat it as a 6 mana spell. That gave you 2 5/4s with Rush. I would treat this as about a 4 mana effect. Like, it's a 4 mana minion. Well, sorry. It's a 4 mana minion and 8 mana effect in total, because you get 2 of them, for 5. In the case of Ritual of the New Moon with the second part of the effect, you're getting, for 5 mana, 12 mana worth of cheat. Again, you're not guaranteed to get the 5/4 rushes, but there's a decent chance with that additional mana cheat that you're going to get a good roll. And as I said, Commander Neptulon had an overload on it, so it was actually basically a mana more to get that cheat. So I actually think Ritual of the New Moon, as long as you get the second part of the effect, is really good. And casting 3 spells, debatably not that hard. You could potentially do this with one of the gifts. I will actually say at this point, I heard a rumor that the gift cards are all rotating out early. I've not been able to find any details anywhere about this, but let me know in the comments below if this is true, because I put them in other videos. Apparently event cards, or like some of the event cards are rotating out early, whereas the ones that came out later in the year are staying for another year. It's just Hearthstone shenanigans. Anyway, I looked at the text document from the Hearthstone website of the cards that are rotating out, and it didn't mention the gifts were going, so I assumed they were staying in for another year, but if they're staying in, Anduin's Gift is potentially a 2 mana 2-spell effect, because you can get the Anduin Gift spell and the Power Word Shield effect, and then that also replaces the card because it gives a draw card on it, so it'd be a really good way to trigger Ritual of the New Moon. If that's not going to be in here, the Dream Keys are also pretty good for doing this. Nightshade Tea, you might just drop it into your priest deck, you want to be vaguely control orientated, and this isn't a too bad a control card, even if you're not looking at the pain part of the package. This card is 3 spells wrapped up into one, so you just play Nightshade Tea 3 times, bang, you've got a Ritual of the New Moon fully charged. You can also do stuff with Monkey Business again, he's back on the slide. Put a bunch of bananas in your hand, feed your minions bananas, and let them know it's Ritual of the Moon time. Okay, I think that is not quite as tempting, but if needs must. And then obviously there's some classic cards like Thrive in the Shadows, where you just discover a spell from your deck, try and find a cheap spell, and cast the cheap spell with the Thrive to get the spell count going up. So priest casting a bunch of cheap spells is not completely out of this world. You can also again run minions that generate spells. Sweet and Snow Flurry can generate some frost spells. Frost spells are often, or at least from what I've seen in the package so far, they're either really cheap or really expensive, so it's like, you know, you're trying your luck a bit in this scenario. But other cards that generate spells could be a bit more consistent in their costs. For example, Mixologist generates you a 1-cost spell. That's a pretty good spell to use for Ritual of the New Moon. Then, obviously, this has some pretty big synergy with Weaver of the Cycle. It's a 5 or more cost spell, so that's very nice. And if you can Tyrande hit the Ritual of the New Moon, that's a lot of stats. Like, if you especially get it in the 6-cost minion effect, you're getting out 24 mana cost of minions for 12 mana in total, not including the 3 spells that you have to summon it with, but it's a really big swing turn if you can get both of these together. And with Ysera, there is a chance that you could actually do this on the same turn, because you could go beyond 10 mana crystals, right? So, do I think this is going to be the more powerful way of doing this? I'm actually not sure. I feel like people are going to be really... Actually, greedy is the wrong word. I think people are going to be more combo-focused with Tyrande, at least early on, and try and get Tyrande to OTK people, whereas Ritual of the New Moon, maybe just sneak into this deck still, because it possibly leads to a lethal condition. But maybe if you're trying to really focus on getting these spells that go to the face, you might not put Ritual of the New Moon in that Tyrande deck. We also have Moonwell, 7 mana priest spell. Deal 4 damage to all enemy characters, restore 4 health to all friendly characters. This card's also pretty good, honestly. It's basically Consecrations tied together. That's 4 damage to all enemy characters. That's a 6 mana effect, right? The 4 health to all friendly characters is pretty close to Divine Hymn, which was a 2 mana effect. Divine Hymn was actually 6, not 4, so it's a little bit weaker than that. All in all, I think it bundles to be about a 7 and a bit mana effect in terms of the individual cards. But again, you're bundling 3 cards together, so it improves the quality of that card considerably. So I think Moonwell is actually really good. Obviously, really good with Tyrande and Weaver of the Cycle again. It's a more than 5-cost spell. And in the case of Tyrande, you play Tyrande, you play Moonwell. Moonwell is doing 8 damage to all enemy characters. Not your board either, just enemy characters, and it heals your side for 8 health. That is a huge swing in health. Like, it's a massive, massive swing. So, yeah, I can definitely see Tyrande in that deck, trying to put a copy of Moonwell in it, and leading to some sort of OTK condition. If you take this card though in a vacuum, actually, it does seem not good, but it seems like there may be better options for Priest. Priest has stuff like Light Bomb, for example, which, again, you don't know exactly what damage you're going to get from the Light Bomb, but fairly frequently in the history of Hearthstone do minions have more attack than health, or at least they have equivalent attack to health, and Light Bomb normally can deal with that, especially in the case of ginormous minions. They're fairly often statted as like 10 10s and 8 8s, in which case Light Bomb is a board clear, whereas Moonwell for 1 more mana maybe isn't the board clear you're looking for. Also in the 7 mana department is Repackage, which is a guaranteed board clear. You are pushing the problem like down the line, but normally that is fine for Priest, just deal with it later. Now obviously, we're not living in a vacuum, and the clear intention of this is Moonwell with Tyrande for the damage, as well as the control potential of the card. So yeah, I definitely think Moonwell will see a bit of play. Also, bear in mind, you could put spell damage in this Tyrande, you know, go to the face deck. You get an Ethereal Oracle on the board, you play the Moonwell with it, you're doing 1 additional damage from the Ethereal Oracle, you're spell bursting to draw some more spells to go into your opponent's face, and you double it with Tyrande, so it's like 10 damage to all characters. That's going to probably be a board clear, let's be real. And then yeah, that is a serious scary proposition. There's, again, Shladra is another option to give you some more spells that do big cleave damage to your opponent's board and to their face. I think this plus Ethereal Oracle plus Tyrande plus Moonwell is a match made in heaven. Now, as you may have like pointed out, you don't really have the mana cost to do this. You could use Ysera to get you beyond 10 mana crystals, in which case you can Moonwell Oracle in the same turn, or Shladra Oracle, and one of the corrupted cards from the Shladra, you could do all of those. Or you play Aviana, right? And I think this is what the game plan's going to be. You play Aviana, you try and use your other cards to survive until you can get the full Moon Rising, and then you'll use stuff like Ethereal Oracle and Moonwell and Shladra and Acupuncture and that type of thing to go for some sort of OTK type scenario with Tyrande. I can see it. Don't put the deck together myself yet, but I can see the vision. We also have Wish of the New Moon, or Mish of the New Wound if you're dumb like me. 3 mana arcane spell. Deal 6 damage to a minion, cast 3 spells to gain lifesteal. Obviously this has a lot of similarities to the other Moon card, which was cast 3 spells to improve the quality of the card. In this case, you're only getting lifesteal on it. We can do this game again of like pegging this to cards. I often peg like damage to a minion to digging straight down, at least in recent times, which was 4 mana to do 8 damage to a minion, and you excavated a treasure. Now, this card didn't really see any play because Excavate Shaman was bad, which also sort of implies at the same time, irrespective of that, that 4 mana to deal 8 damage to a minion isn't really worth it. And my theory of this is there are a lot of, I say a lot, there's a couple of cards that have like a 4 mana-ish effect which just destroy a minion outright. So why do you care about the 8 damage? Like, the 8 damage can get countered by other things like Divine Shield, or cards that say, you know, we take reduced damage, that type of thing. In the case of Wish of the New Moon, it's 1 mana cheaper to get 2 less damage. So I think it's somewhat comparable to Digging Straight Down in terms of the mana cost to the effect you get on top of it. The other card I would like to compare this to, again, it's actually a Shaman card, is Tidal Surge. This was a nature spell. I can't remember exactly when Tidal Surge came out. It was around the... I know it was seeing some use around the time of... Actually, maybe I'm thinking of Dunk Dag. Of Madness of the Dark Moon Fair. Maybe it was a little bit before that, actually. And this card was, like, basically one of these 26th to 30th cards you put in your deck just to survive while you're doing some sort of value shaman type play. This was 3 mana to deal 5 damage to a minion, and it had lifesteal in it, which is actually the effect of Wish of the New Moon, with 1 less damage, but you don't have to jump through any hoops to get to the lifesteal. You just get it up front. And this card didn't really, like, you know, push the needle too much, so I kind of see the same thing for Wish of the New Moon. I don't think it's going to really push the boundaries too hard. The final card I'll just mention is Void Shard, which is another priest card, which is lifesteal, you know, deal damage to a minion or the face in the case of Void Shard. Void Shard sees no play, but to be fair, this is a 4 mana spell, and it's doing 2 less damage. So that's the big reason. Wish of the New Moon has 2 more damage on it, it has 1 mana less, but it only can go to minions. Now, obviously, there has some like uses of this card. If you're playing Ritual of the New Moon in your deck anyway, you're probably casting a bunch of cheap spells, in which case you're probably going to get Wish of the New Moon effect off as well, quite easily. Also, Wish of the New Moon effect, 3 mana to deal 6 damage to a minion, it's actually probably, like, if you compare that effect to its cast 3 spells effect, the ratio of that is closer than Ritual of the New Moon, their effect to the cast 3 spells effect. Like, you really need to get the 3 spells on Ritual of the New Moon to make it worthwhile. The mana cheat then is really, really strong. If you lose out on lifesteal of Wish of the New Moon, it's not the end of the world, right? If you're just using it as 3 mana killer guy, which, you know, 6 damage to a minion at 3 mana is probably go to kill most minions, it's not that bad then, right? And in that case, Wish of the New Moon is at the very least fuel for Ritual of the New Moon, so I actually think this card might see some play just because of a lack of competition in the slot for cheap single target removal in Priest, if they need such a thing. Actually, the other best option Priest has got right now is Funhouse Mirror, and that is not that good. It's probably more consistent to take Wish of the New Moon instead, so again, a bit maybe underwhelming, but in the modern version of Hearthstone, or at least where the game's going, this actually might be a really strong card. Finally, we have Twilight Influence. 2 mana shadow spell. Choose one. Destroy a minion with 3 or less attack, or summon a random 2-cost minion. Okay, this card's really easy to deal with. It's garbage. Even for, like, the modern version of Hearthstone, aka the reduced power level Hearthstone, I still don't think it's a very good card. The first effect is Shadow Word Pain, which, by the way, is rotating out, I believe, of the core set. So this is basically replacement of Shadow Word Pain, a card that we're seeing no play. The second part of the effect is worse than Maze Guide. Maze Guide's effect is summon a random 2-cost minion, which is the same thing as the Twilight Influence, but Maze Guide came with another 1/1, aka his body. You don't get that on Twilight Influence, and that was a 2-mana minion. And Maze Guide saw almost 0 play, with minor exceptions of free-to-play Zoo decks, which I do think actually ran Maze Guide, for obvious reasons. Other than that, it didn't really see any play. So will Twilight Influence see any play? Probably not. No, I don't expect it to. Anyway, they are the Priest packages, and I kind of see it as, you know, Priest has got this main type of package. And this is going to be the Tyrande, do a bunch of damage from hand, kill your opponent combo. And you'll probably use Aviana to reduce the cost of all your big spells that do damage to your opponent to 1. That is kind of my theory. There's then some other cards that you'll probably potentially tie to this package. I think these 4 cards will be, like, maybe core to the package, but you'll probably have some of the things like Grift, which can generate spells that can go to the face as well. They'll probably go into your deck. You'll probably put Ritual of the New Moon and Wish of the New Moon into this deck as well, because you need to survive until you can do this. Like, you have to survive until you can play Aviana. You have to survive until the moon rises. You have to survive after you play, like, well, I guess actually the point when you're playing Tyrande Moonwell and all that jazz, you're probably going to win the game at that point, but you're going to have to survive until like turn 12 or 13, in which case Wish of the New Moon doing 6 damage to a really troubling minion might be nice. Also, the lifesteal might actually be really important. And Ritual of the New Moon, maybe you have to cash out early with your Tyrande, don't wait for the entire combo, and just double the Ritual of the New Moon and try and kill your opponent that way. So perhaps this more value-focused cards can see some play in this world versus just a pure OTK cards. Finally, I think the Imbue package could also get incorporated into all of this. And it's really, rather than looking at it as the OTK deck, then it's really driving you towards a value-based deck instead, where you have this potential win condition of Tyrande, Moonwell, Shaladrisil, Grifter stuff, that type of thing. And if you can't hit that combo, you lose the combo in some way, or you have to burn your Tyrande early, or your Moonwell early, you can always try and generate something from the imbued button that slowly chips at your opponent. Because you can still generate, you know, the 0/1 cost Moonwells, depending on how many times you imbue. And that's still going to be scary over multiple turns. So perhaps all of these cards see play together in some sort of big priest package. It's basically Control Priest, to be honest with you, but with a potential OTK kicker in there. The other card, don't think I didn't forget about you. Solenic Drake, you promised me that Dragon Priest was going to be a thing, and you showed me one dragon weeks ago, and then no more dragons for Priest. Honestly, I felt kind of sad, but then when you really think about it, actually Dragon Priest package was already pretty strong, right, with Zarimi stuff. Even with the Zarimi nerfs, it's probably still going to be a fairly strong deck. And then they have other things now being added to the set. So even though we only saw one Priest new dragon, I actually think Dragon Priest will still be a really strong deck. Naralax into stuff like Ysera, into then cheating out some more, you know, dragons with that, including Zarimi. That is another legitimate OTK type thing, like Naralax, Ysera, Zarimi. Assume you played 5 other dragons during the course of the game. That is a huge amount of stats you put onto the board and you get to take 2 turns. That is probably going to be, versus most decks, lethal, right? So yeah, I think Dragon Priest will also be a strong deck. Now we go to the final class, which is Death Knight. Death Knight, we saw Ursoc, which is their wild god, and Grotesque Runeblade. The only thing I really gathered from this was that there's probably going to be a red-green package, because Grotesque Runeblade wants you to play red-green cards. So let's start working through these new cards. Infested Breath, 2 mana, single Blood Rune Death Knight card. Deal 2 damage, summon a 0/2 Leech. And a Leech is a 1 mana 0/2 beast. At the end of your turn, your hero steals 1 health from the lowest health enemy. That is potentially pretty spookerific. It's kind of weak in some regards. Stealing health from enemies is often, or at least like for the most part of history of Hearthstone, being tied to spells and minions stealing minions' health, right? So not this, I steal from your health to give my health more stuff. Now, there was an exception to that rule, and the exception was the Azurite Snake, which is kind of an iconic card, but for like weird reasons. This card, which was the final reward for excavating in Warlock, let you steal 10 health from your opponent. And there was a gimmick in that deck where, or at least when it was first announced or revealed or put into the wild, right, where people would bounce the Azurite Snake back 3 times and it would kill your opponent. That deck got nerfed in, I think, 2 or 3 days. I think it was actually just 2 days. The Azurite Snake was, like, removed from the game, basically, because it was such a toxic way of playing the game that the Hearthstone team just acted. And this was even though, during those 2 or 3 days, the Excavate Warlock deck was tier 3. Like, its win rate was not that good, but it was so unfun to play against, because you can't really play around your health being stolen. Some classes can actually. Death Knight is one of the few classes that could extend their max health, but for the classes that gained armor instead, you couldn't armor up out of it, right? It's not like taking damage. It was actually stealing your health total, so if your health went to 0, you could have 300 armor. It didn't matter. The snake did not give a shit. So, yeah, because of the toxic play pattern, it was kind of awkward to play around. In fact, it was really not that possible to play around the health stealing aspect. The best thing you could do was really just, like, rush them down, because obviously it's a big tempo loss to bounce the card back multiple times, and that's why this deck was not very good, because there were a lot of good aggro decks out there, and they could just aggro down that deck. Anyway, they have somewhat learned from this in the form of the Leech. The Leech can only steal 1 health. Well, this Leech can only steal 1 health, And also, it's the lowest health enemy, which means there is counterplay to this, because you can put a minion on your opponent's side of the board. In case you're wondering, that is you could put a minion down, and the leech will eat that instead. And you will still get the 1 health, so you do get the improvement to your hero, but your opponent can actually play around it. The other thing about this card is it's not a battle cry, so you can't bounce it back multiple times and play it onto the field, thus stealing more and more health. And actually, there's not that many effects that trigger based on end of turn effects, especially like duplication effects. So Bloated Leech is pretty safe in the way it has been printed. There's actually another card as well that Infested Breath kind of reminded me of, and I think a lot of people. 2 mana, deal 2 damage, summon a 0/2 is Bomb Toss. This card did see a bit of play, I seem to remember, in like Death Rattle Hunter decks. I think it was actually the mech version of that deck, because that card would generate a 0/2 bomb, which had Death Rattle deal 2 damage to the enemy hero, and you'd play a bunch of cards that, you know, trigger Death Rattle effects. Also, it being a mech meant you could magnetize to the bomb, so your opponent didn't want to kill the bombs because they would take damage to the face, but if they didn't kill the bombs, you would magnetize something to it and effectively give that mech charge, right? So it was really, really scary. Now, Bloated Leech, I don't think is as good as a Goblin Bomb, to be completely honest with you, especially in that deck at that time. The Leech, though, it is going to do 1 damage, and it could stay on the board, so theoretically it could do more than 1 damage. It's probably not going to do that, though, because your opponent's probably going to kill it, because it only has 2 health. Yeah, it's okay, but unlike Goblin Bomb, where you're guaranteed it's going to go to the face, the Leech, you can play around it, you can put minions to the board. So at the end of the day, you're really like, am I happy just gaining more health to my hero, max health to my hero? It depends what the rest of your deck is, right? If you're a control-oriented deck, that's fine, but it's not going to, like, you know, move the earth for you. One minor thing I'll just say about all of this, though, is there is one advantage. Versus Divine Shield, stealing health isn't the same as doing damage, but it actually goes under Divine Shield. So in case there was some sort of Divine Shield meta, the leeches actually might become a little bit stronger, because they could just eat through Divine Shield guys. There's also Sanguine Infestation. This is a double Blood Rune spell, 4 mana. Draw 2 cards, summon 2 0/2 leeches. We always do this. Peg 2, draw 2 cards to Arcane Intellect. Arcane Intellect doesn't see any play, and it was 3 mana. Typically, for a draw 2 card to see play now, you need to have a 2 mana draw 2 cards effect, and if it's any more beyond that, you have to have like an upside to it. And in the case of Sanguine Infestation, it's basically 2 mana draw 2 cards, if you assume the leeches are 1 mana minions. Are leeches 1 mana minions though? Probably not. They're probably less than that. So I actually think bundled together, the Sanguine Infestation is actually a bit overvalued. I think if you really wanted to push this card, you would print it as 3 mana. I think otherwise it's actually a little bit too underwhelming right now. The other card you'd actually compare this to is Vacation Planning in Paladin. Vacation Planning is draw 2 cards, for 4 mana by the way. Summon 3 Silverhand Recruits, which I will appreciate again, they're not 1 mana cards, right? They're less than 1 mana cards. They're only 1/1s. So it depends what you value 3 Silverhand Recruits at. It's like a 3/3 stat line, so I'd probably value it as about 2 mana worth of minions. And that restored 4 health. This card, in a class that had token-based mechanics and a swarm deck, or a flood deck, in the not-too-recent past, saw no play. Which sort of makes me think that Sanguine Infestation, which is basically worse than this card in almost every single way, probably doesn't see any play. The only thing I'll say about the Sanguine Infestation is potentially the leeches could kill something, and rather than restoring 4 health, you're getting like 2 permanent health. So, you know, maybe you'd say it's close to being like even, but even then I don't think Vacation Planning was particularly good. So again, the quality of the cards are going down, I think, from this year to the last 2 years, so perhaps it sees play, but I'm not sure. The final leech card is Hideous Husk. Single Blood Rune, 6 mana, 3/5 Undead Beast minion. Your leeches steal 2 more health from their victims. Battlecry, summon 2 0/2 leeches. Okay, this card is actually pretty strong and kind of ties the entire leech package together. Your leeches stealing 3 health rather than 1 health is a huge deal. Now, what would you expect as a stat line for a 6 mana minion? Let's play this game. You'd probably expect about 6 mana, at the very least 6-7. I think actually at 6 mana you've hit that turning point where you actually would like to have had 1 additional one. So I think you want 14 stats at 6 for a card to be seeing some play in standard for around their stat line. The Hideous Husk is giving you 8 in the form of the Husk, right? Also, it's giving you +4 from the leeches, which is 12, so it's 2 under what I would say is what you'd expect. However, the suck, I think could only be counted as a stat line, right? Sure, the leeches don't get it, but your hero does get it. And if you treat it as that manner, you're actually getting 6 max health on your hero, which is a really, really big deal. Now, it's not quite true to say this, because, you know, I could argue at that point that you're actually getting 18 stats right for 6, which is obviously insane. It's not quite the same, because having the health on the minion means it can attack more often, potentially, to do more damage to your opponent, whereas the health on you is really just to let you survive long to play more cards to do damage to your opponent. Also, the leech is stealing 2 more health from their victims, means that if you hit something that only has 1 health, and the leeches hit the lowest health enemy, you'll only steal 1, I believe, so you might actually not hit this 18. 18 is the maximum, but you're probably going to get something less than that, unless there is nothing on their board, in which case you're guaranteed to suck 6 off your opponent instead. So yeah, this is the package of the leeches together. Obviously there is all a synergy in playing like Hideous Husk after you've played the Infested Breath or the Sanguine Infestation to make these leeches as well suck even more. And if these leeches had suck 3 on them, I'd actually be singing a different tune about both the Infested Breath and the Sanguine Infestation. So anytime you see one of these fucking leeches, I think you need to kill it as soon as possible, because this Hideous Husk is going to be a pretty scary proposition. If you leave 2 of these guys on the board and they play Hideous Husk, boy, you could be in a lot of trouble. Now, what could you do with these Hideous Husks beyond just their leeching effect? Well, it is somewhat token-orientated deck, right? Or a token-orientated package. You're summoning these cheap guys and summoning multiple copies of them. So maybe you want to play this with Horizon's Edge. So not only are you sucking your opponent, you're also carrying them as well to like really, really drive in the pain. You kill my leech, I Horizon Edge you again. Very nasty. You can also allow the Goldblade to actually give these leeches some attack, so they have more bark than their bite. Wait, more bite than their bark even? That is theoretically something you could do. You could Hydration Totem as well. You can Taurus into Shaman and drop an Hydration Totem between the Hideous Husk and one of these leeches to again give your leeches stat lines. The only shame about all of this though is most of the time when you want to do a tokeny package in Death Knight, you really want it to be triple unholy because they have Grave Strength, which is kind of like Bloodlust. Unfortunately, Hideous Husk has got 1 blood rune on it, so you can't do it in the triple unholy package. So it has those unfortunate like perks. Also in the case of Eliza, because one of the leech package cards is double blood, you'd have to run double blood single frost, and that's probably not what you're looking for this deck. You might want to put some of the green cards in there for a bit more tokeny aspects from those cards as well. So it's really what do you plug this package into, which I'm not completely sure about. So yeah, these are the leech cards. I don't think in their own right you can really run them in their own deck. There's only 3 of them. It's not enough to build your entire deck around. You could, if you really want to get super leech focused though, run stuff like Hematurge. They are all blood rune cards. Increases your chance of finding them if you put a Hematurge in your deck and getting more leech goodness. You can also Raptor Herald and try and put a Dark Gift on this Hideous Husk. It is a beast. And actually, I think part of the intention of this deck is to run it in the Dark Gift package. Death Knight is one of the Dark Gift packages, or supposed Dark Gift packages. Realistically, you can put them in any fucking deck you want. But if you put a Dark Gift on Hideous Husk and you hit the double Battle Cry option, that is really scary. 4 of these leeches going out there, sucking out 12 of your opponent's healths from their face and their board. That is nasty. That's seriously, seriously nasty. So I can see again you trying to put Raptor Herald just to try and high roll this undead beast. You can also use Tidal Pupil to copy the spells, but again, I've said the spells I think are actually quite weak compared to the Hideous Husk. I think that's like the real start of the show. You can also Headless Horseman. Headless Horseman can generate you undeads eventually, and this is an undead beast, so perhaps you just try and put Headless Horseman in some sort of value-based deck, double red, single green, and over the course of the game, you just keep slowly sucking your opponent dry. Don't take that out of context. And that leads you to a win condition with both the Headless Horseman button and the leech effects. And then finally, they are just at the very least tokens. So if you have any, corpses. So at the very least, if you have any corpse-based mechanic, like Exarch Maladar, you could use the leeches to fuel corpse generation. So yeah, I think it's an interesting package. It's definitely something you'll just plug into something else though. We also have Rite of Atrocity. I think this is the only Dark Gift card in the Death Knight set. Single Unholy Rune spell, discover an undead, spend 2 corpses to give it a dark gift. Discover a something is the classic Raven Idol text. I've actually been trying to remember what this card was for the entirety of the reveal. I'm so bad with names, but I'm so good with pictures. Like, I could picture this card, I just couldn't fucking remember what it was called, and I eventually found it on this video that I was making. All these other ones where I was like, you know, discover a X. Raven Idol is normally the card to compare them to, because Raven Idol is a card that didn't really see too much play, and was 1 mana discover a minion or discover a spell, which implies just discovering a card for 1 mana. Not a great deal, as long as that deal is a minion or a spell. If it's a weapon or a hero, maybe things would change at that point. Which means normally when you have discover a something, especially if it's something with a tribe on it, or, you know, some other restrictive characteristic like Death Rattle, you normally get something else as part of the deal. So it's a 1 mana discover a something, and then reduce its cost or reduce something else's cost by 1. So it sort of implies it's about a 0 mana effect. Now, Rite of Atrocity, you don't get this reduction of mana, right? However, you do get a dark gift, as long as you spend 2 corpses, and this is like the big part of this card. If you don't spend the 2 corpses, I think this card is not good enough to see play in Standard. It's basically Raven Idol, right? Which is very slightly more specific. However, undead cards in Death Knight is basically saying a minion, because almost all their minions are undead, so it's not really that specific. It's really the dark gift that makes this card, because the dark gift I've been valuing, generally speaking, about a 2 mana effect, so you could actually argue that the Rite of Atrocity is better than Carrion Studies or Oasis Outlaw by, like, a mana cost on the card. Now, I will say I don't think this is actually completely true, because the Carrion Studies had a very small pool of cards for the Death Rattle cards, and cheating some of these Death Rattles early was actually good for timing reasons. In the case of Oasis Outlaw, it was really used to fuel the Naga, player spell mechanic, the Sharpshooter mechanic. Right is, like, you know, sort of just a value type card, but I think it's okay. It's certainly comparable to these cards. If you really want Dark Gifts and Dark Gift Death Knight, you probably put this card in your deck. Again, we talked about this before. Hideous Husk, try and give that a dark gift. It's an undead as well. Get double battle cry, win the game. It's probably not win the game, but it's really like put your opponent behind the 8 ball. I can see that being a thing. Also worth noting, this card can be tutored by the new card Falric, which has been added to the core set. Also, it could be used to generate even more corpses, to make sure you have the 2 corpse requirement to spend on Rite of Atrocity. Rite of Atrocity, spend 2 corpses is actually not that hard a requirement, right? But you're probably not going to do it by turn 1 when you could theoretically play this card, so it doesn't super matter. Again, a 1 cost spell, you can weave it into a future turn, probably fairly easily. We also have Monstrous Mosquito, 1 mana 1/2 beast. At the end of your turn, give your other minions +1 attack. This is very similar to stuff like Hellion, for example, which was printed recently, which just says, you know, it's a minion that gives other minions +1 attack. Or the classic card for this in a lot of free-to-play zoo decks was Raid Leader. You'd play a bunch of minions, and then on turn 3, you'd play Raid Leader, and it'd give all these token minions +1 attack, basically doubling their attack stat, because a lot of them would be 1/1s and that type of thing. And you would just run over your face, assuming they had no wide board-clearing card. Now, Monstrous Mosquito is better than Raid Leader in some aspects, and also worse in other aspects. The obvious worst aspect of this card is it's not on an aura or a battle cry, it's an end of turn effect, so you don't get the immediate +1 attack. You don't get the +1 attack immediately, which is actually a big problem when you're playing some sort of zoo deck, and it seems like this is geared towards this tokeny zoo type deck. You want to get your damage out there as fast as fucking possible, and you can't do it with the Monstrous Mosquito. You have to wait like that additional turn to actually get the value on the card. The advantage of this card, though, compared to Raid Leader, is if you killed the Monstrous Mosquito, the attack buff it gave to your other minions is permanent. In the case of Raid Leader, it wasn't, so you always targeted the Raid Leader after it was played, and it would reduce 1 attack off all the other minions on the board. It was typically a pretty good value play to kill this thing. The other nice thing about the Monstrous Mosquito is it's only a 1 mana card, not a 3 mana card, which means it's actually just a lot easier to weave this into other turns. So it has its, it has its benefits and it has its downsides. One of the potential benefits of this card is in the Zerg deck, especially now considering that the Zergling, I hadn't made this slide until that point of seeing the nerfs, but now that we know that Zergling is not as good a card to get hand buffed, you may want to just board buff it with the Monstrous Mosquito, because the Zergling doesn't get a copy of it anymore, it just summons a Zergling, in which case if you play Zergling into Monstrous Mosquito, you're going to get two 1s instead of the 2 Wait, I'm so stupid. Yeah, I'm losing my brain. You get 2/2/1s instead of 2/1/1s. Sorry, I was trying to add the combos of the cards together. Doesn't matter. And that'd be nice as well with Infestor as well, which also is getting nerfed. It's only going to give you 1 attack now. But maybe you run the Zergling plus the Infestor plus the Monstrous Mosquito to give you super attack on your Zerglings, which are pretty fragile, but that's fine. You're a Zoo deck, who cares? You might also want to run this with the Leech package. I said the Leech is a somewhat token-focused deck. You play your spells, or you play your cards that generate leeches, and you put your Monstrous Mosquito onto the board, so your leeches get attacked. So not only are they sucking your opponent, they're also biting your opponent too. Maybe. And actually, Death Knight has got a lot of token-generating cards. They're not normally used in the same way that, like, those mechanics have been used in, like, Hunter and Druid in the past. A lot of the token-generating cards in Death Knight have, like, Rush or just attack random enemy minions on them. But perhaps you play, like, your Ghoul's Knight. Some of the tokens survive at the end of the Ghoul's Knight, and you just drop a Monstrous Mosquito onto the board to buff all the other ghouls, so they're actually putting up a pretty big threat for the turn afterwards. Maybe Monstrous Mosquito slots into one of these decks. If there's a Triple Unholy Rune deck out there, I actually think Monstrous Mosquito will go into that deck. I just don't know if there is actually a package for that right now. If there is, though, maybe put Nathendra in there. 7 mana, 7/7 Undead Dragon. Double Unholy Rune. Taunt, Death Rattle. Split into 1/1 Beetles. At the start of your turn, reform with any remaining. And the beetles are called Nathendric Beetles. And at the start of your turn, they combine with any other friendly beetles and reform Nathendra. Wow, what a card. Just actually, what a card. Really, really, really spooky card. Like, it feels like a raid boss type card. So, in case you're wondering exactly how this works from, like, the text. If you kill Nathendra, Nathendra basically splits into 1/1 beetles, equivalent to its stats, onto your board, and it sits there as the 1/1s. When your turn starts over again, any beetle that's on the board at that point super combines back into Nathendra again, and leads you into that combined stat line onto the Nathendra. And this could be potentially really scary if you're playing against a minion-based deck, or at least for them. Because Nathendra has Taunt. You can't just ignore this thing. You have to beat it down. And obviously you would like to, after you've beat this thing down, probably go to the face. But if you do that, the beetles are just going to combine back up again. And then, you know, Nathendra's back with Taunt again. So it's a really, really annoying thing. It kind of reminds me a bit of Rattlegore, but with Taunt. Now, there are obviously some advantages to Rattlegore over Nathendra. Rattlegore, every time it died, it would lose 1/1 in stat lines. You knew where you stood with Rattlegore, right? It dies, -1, -1. Dies, -1, -1. So on and so forth. In the case of Nathendra, there is a situation where the minion dies and then your opponent runs 1 damage to all enemy minions and just diffuses Nathendra in 1 turn. That is definitely a possibility, but I don't think a lot of decks out there will just run that type of thing. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm just reading the room wrong. In which case, your opponent's going to have to kill Nathendra and then use other minions to trade into the beetles. And they probably can't kill all the beetles off at the same time, so I think you'll get a Rattlegore-like effect when Nathendra comes back with 5/5 stats instead. And it's just this big, annoying wall for your opponent to deal with, so I potentially quite like the flavor of this card. Obviously, it's really weak to silence as well, but there's actually not that much silence in the game anymore. Weak to stealing, there's not that many stealing cards in the game anymore, so yeah, I think that the door is opening for Nathendra to actually be a legitimate card in the game. It's just, again, whether or not there is a double Unholy Rune package that fits Nathendra and is good enough to see play. There are some other intriguing things about this card, by the way. It's actually really bad to hand buff this card. I say it's bad. It's not great to hand buff this card because you're obviously limited by your board space by how many beetles you can get back. So if you gave this thing +2/+2 and gave it 9/9 stat line, if it died, you'd only get 7/7 stat lines of beetles on the board, which would then combine back to 7/7. So you'd kind of lose the hand buffing effect, which is a shame, but it's still not bad. You still got the +2/+2 to begin with, by the way, right? Obviously, also, if you have any other minion on the board with Nathendra, it makes Nathendra considerably worse, since you have 1 fewer beetles that can go onto the board, which means they combine back into a lower stat line on Nathendra. By the way, in case you ever give this thing a Dark Gift and you give it Reborn, I believe the Death Rattle will trigger before the Reborn, so Nathendra would fill the board with the beetles, and then the Reborn would try and trigger, but if there was no board space, you wouldn't get the Reborn effect, so it would stop there. Now, what I will say is, it might not be great to hand buff this card as well. Board buffing it, though, is actually a different matter, and you could do this with, like, the Corrupted Nightmare, or even just Nightmare in general. drop a big buffing card on this card while it's on the board. Let's say this is in a 2/2 form. You turn it into a 7/7, it dies via the effect of like the Nightmare, not the corrupted version, or you die by trading into something else or that type of thing. And then suddenly you get all these 7/7 worth of beetles again that combine into a 7/7, and you remove the buff card and turn it into actual real legitimate stat line. So yeah, this card could be really annoying to deal with if you just keep buffing it on the field with stats, and your opponent doesn't have a spell that just does big AoE damage, or a minion that does AoE damage. And if this card is actually seriously strong, you'll have to take it into your deck to have AoE damage. Oh, I had the Nightmare on the other thing. Actually, the Nightmare is also funny because if this minion dies as a result of Nightmare, who cares? It's going to reform back up again, right? Unless your opponent trades all the 1/1s off. Another nice thing about this card is, if it's a super, super, super annoying strong card, Wakener of Souls could resurrect it. And that would be a pretty big thing to resurrect. And not only that, the Wakener of Souls is a taunt minion, so is Nathandra. So maybe there is some package here for an unholy taunt Death Knight package just to generate the wall of Nathandra and win the game that way. Maybe. We also have Corpse Flower, 3 mana, 0/5 undead, double unholy rune. After your opponent summons a minion, spend 2 corpses to deal 3 damage to it. This card is actually low-key kind of good, I think, but it's in a really weird way. Like, okay, let's peg it to stuff. Specimen Claw is a very similar effect to this. There are a few cards out there that say, if your opponent plays a card, you attack it. Specimen Claw is the most recent example of that, in which case Specimen Claw is 3 mana, deal 2 damage to a minion as your opponent plays it. Obviously, Specimen Claw, you can play around it, because eventually, if it hits something that is too strong, it dies, right? That is the way to play around Specimen Claw. Alternatively, you play something with like a Divine Shield, and it doesn't kill it. That type of deal. There's also things like Morshan Watch Post, where it doesn't actually instantly attack it, but it just generates a 2/2 for you to attack later on. So, again, it punishes your opponent for playing cards. Notice I'm saying playing, by the way. There's also Trapdoor Spider. If your opponent plays a card, the Trapdoor Spider attacks it. And it has Poisonous, which is effectively infinite attack. So if you play a card into Trapdoor Spider, it's going to die. Again, you can defuse the Trapdoor Spider by playing something with Divine Shield, or you play something that, you know, you just don't really give a huge shit about, that trades the Trapdoor Spider in the process. All of these cards, and I think throughout the entire history of Hearthstone, including some of the other ones, like, was it called Dread or something like that? I forgot what it's called now. The Hunter card, which also attacked things on Swamp King Dread, right? Who attacked things as they were played, it says plays. Corpse Flower doesn't. It says summons. So if you summon any fucking token into Corpse Flower, and you have the Corpse Engine to do it, Corpse Flower is going to ping 3 damage to it, and it also doesn't attack it. So Corpse Flower doesn't die in the process of doing this. You're literally restricted only by the Corpse Engine. So if you can find a way to generate a absolute metric fuck ton of corpses, and you put 2 Corpse Flowers on the board, you can actually just basically lock out your opponent from playing cards. Or at least any card that is less than 6 health, or doesn't have Divine Shield, you know, other metrics based on that. That is a really seriously scary situation that could occur. The issue is, how do you get to that situation? And I think that's the problem with Corpse Flower and why it probably won't see play. It's just hard to enable it. One of the other issues actually of this card as well is a lot of the very heavy unholy packages are token-based decks, which is, you know, fine with Corpse Flower. You generate corpses via the tokens. However, you want to spend 5 corpses to use Grave Strength, because it's like the big win condition of that type of deck. And you can't really be, like, willing to spend so many fucking corpses on your Corpse Flower. You'd rather get the Grave Strength off instead. So it probably doesn't see play in the same deck. You're probably actually looking at this as like double green, single red, and a bit more control focused. But I think there's a world where Corpse Flower, especially against like if a token deck ever came out of the ether that was based about summoning a bunch of 1/1s or something, Corpse Flower just munching them actually might be a legitimate counter to that type of effect. One other thing worth noting, Falric. Falric's effect not only can tutor for this thing, but also could generate a shit ton of corpses. If you combine Falric with, like, you know, Ghoul Party, that could be just 10 corpses there for you. But the problem with this, again, is that at that point, you're probably playing Corpse Flower around turn 8, at which point dealing 3 damage to a minion is probably not a big deterrent anymore. You kind of want the effect to be off early to deal with the early token decks, and you probably can't generate the corpses fast enough to deal with those things. So Corpse Flower are a really interesting card, but I don't think it's actually going to be good. I think the final card of the entire set, Morbid Swarm, 1 mana, single blood, single unholy rune spell, choose one. Summon 2/1/1 ants or spend 2 corpses to deal 4 damage to a minion. Like all the choose one cards, we end with a bad card. I actually think that Druid card now that says like discover a choose one card is bad because all the choose one cards are basically bad. Maybe 1 or 2 exceptions. Alright, let's go through this card. Summon 2/1/1 ants is basically the effect of Living Roots, which is summon 2/1/1 saplings. 4 damage to a minion is like a supercharged version of the other part of the choose one effect of Living Roots, which is deal 2 damage. But again, you have to hit a minion with the swarm. Also, weirdly for a choose one effect, you can't pick the second option unless you have 2 corpses. Otherwise, it wouldn't work. So it's like choose one, but it's like the illusion of choice if you don't have 2 corpses. You have to take the 1/1 ants. Now, I will say, Living Roots has seen play both for the damage, in the case of like Malygos decks, and also the sapling aspect of it for token-based decks. And I just said Death Knight could generate some sort of token-based deck. Sneaky Snakes was another example of token-based decks that came with stealth in the form of Hunter. So if Death Knight has some sort of token-based deck, 1 mana summoning 2/1/1s, not completely crazy. Although it would be nice to have like stealth or something like that on them, just to try and make sure they're alive so that you can buff them later on into the game. The second part of the aspect of this card is 4 damage to a minion. That is Shadow Bolt. Shadow Bolt saw like very little play. That was 3 mana deal 4 damage to a minion. More reasonable though to compare this to is probably Hearthstrike, which is a Death Knight card that's in the set right now. That's 1 mana deal 3 damage to a minion. If it kills it, you generate a corpse. Morbid Swarm does 1 more damage, but you don't get a corpse from it, and also you have to spend 2 corpses to do it. Hearthstrike sees 0 play. Morbid Swarm, maybe if there is some reason to have a threshold of I need to kill 4 health minion guys. Morbid Swarm might see play because of the second part of its effect. Maybe if there's a good enough token deck, again, Death Knight token decks are potentially a thing. Maybe, again, that improves the quality of this card, but I don't think there's going to be a token Death Knight deck, and I don't think this card will see play. We're done! That is it. That's the final reveal cards. All that's left for me to do now are the star ratings, and I mentioned at the start of all the reveals that I wasn't sure if I was going to invest in this set. I think at this point now, and this actually isn't to do with the set quality, actually the set quality in terms of how I think I would enjoy the set is actually trying to like pull me back into the game. I actually just think at this point I'm kind of done with Hearthstone. I've played it for, you know, many years, like 8 or so years. I think I'm happy enough to put it down for some time. Maybe I'll come back to it, but I'm actually just happy with things. I hope everyone enjoys the set, though. I think it's really cool. There's a lot of decks out there that I would love to have had like a year ago when I was a bit more interested in it. Like the Dragon Paladin deck, I think looks really, really fun. So I hope everyone enjoys it. I will do a star rating video, but I will forewarn you on this one. Normally I build the decks and then star rating after I've built my decks. I'm just going to wing it. So if I'm horrendously wrong, then oh well, it's because I didn't really put in the effort this time compared to last times. But you know what, when I put the efforts in, I'm often wrong anyway, so it won't matter. Anyway, thanks for watching the reveals, and I'll get the star rating videos coming up over the next couple of days. This expansion, I should have got the date for this. It releases at the end of this month, so look forward to it. Get the pre-bundles early, and have a great time. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next time. Bye!